Canada's new Justice Minister, Shawn Fraser, dismissed concerns about two Liberal bills that enable criminals to be freed on bail as, quote, weird.
Despite talking tough about trade on the campaign trail, Prime Minister Mark Carney's recent exemptions on U.S. goods essentially cancel out any retaliatory tariffs.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre blasted Liberal Prime Minister Mark Carney for refusing to release a federal budget this year. Hello Canada, it's Friday, May 16th, and this is the True North Daily Brief. I'm Cosmin, Dzsurdzsa.
And I'm Clayton, DeMaine.
We've got you covered with all the news you need to know. Let's discuss the top stories of the day and the True North exclusives you won't hear anywhere else. Canada's freshly minted Justice Minister Shawn Fraser thinks it's, quote, weird to want to repeal justice bills that make it easier for criminals to reoffend, even as police associations are raising the alarm over current catch-and-release legislation. On Wednesday, Fraser used one of his first media opportunities to flippantly dismiss Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre's call to repeal two bills he blames for the current lax attitude to letting accused criminals out on bail who often go on to reoffend. During the federal election, multiple police associations echoed the need to repeal at least two Liberal soft-on-crime bills. When pressed on whether he would introduce legislation amending the criminal code as per Poilievre's request, the new Justice Minister and Attorney General said he found the proposals, quote, weird. While light on details and explanations, Fraser added that he thinks the bills actually strengthen Canada's justice system. Fraser said, quote, I find it very weird, frankly, that the Conservatives would be championing the repeal of legislation that actually strengthens the bail system. Poilievre has called for the Liberal government to repeal Bills C5 and C75. Both pieces of legislation instruct judges to approach bail decisions with more leniency and to release accused criminals with less onerous conditions. Conservatives have called the current system a liberal catch-and-release approach to bail. Months earlier, Fraser, who was previously the immigration and then housing minister, said he was leaving politics to spend more time with family. Along with criticizing the Liberal Party's approach to criminal justice, Poilievre has laid the blame for high housing costs and an overburdened healthcare system squarely at Fraser's feet, given his previous cabinet assignments. The Conservative Party leader lamented to reporters on Tuesday that Fraser is now, quote, the minister responsible for addressing the Liberal crime crisis. Some of our listeners might not have heard of Bills C5 and C75 specifically. Clayton, could you explain what are some of the major issues that police and legal experts have raised about these bills specifically?
Right. So you have police unions, Crown lawyers, and even victims advocacy groups who have all raised concerns about these bills. So police unions have been arguing that Bill C5, for example, which repealed mandatory minimum sentences on several offenses, including drugs and crimes involving firearms, emboldened violent offenders by reducing penalties for gun-related offenses. They say that it had the opposite effect one would hope for as gun-related violence increases in major cities. They argue that being softer on gun-wielding criminals does nothing to reduce the rate of those crimes and may even worsen it. C5 also mandated that courts prescribe conditional sentencing when possible, reducing the number of criminals in jail, but also increasing the likelihood that those convicted and placed on house arrest could reoffend. Some Crown attorneys and police have warned that resources can't be used to prevent individuals on house arrest from simply leaving their homes and reoffending. With C75, on the other hand, it's been criticized as the bill which made courts give the least restrictive conditions possible to those arrested for crimes, including violent ones. Police, lawyers, and victims advocates have all warned that the intent of this bill isn't connected with the reality Canadians are seeing as a result of the legislation. While the intent is likely not to have innocent people awaiting sentencing in jails where they might be more likely to become criminals, Victims' advocates have warned that the bill values the rights of potentially dangerous criminals over public safety and the rights to security of victims. It's worth noting that several premiers, including David Eby in BC, Alberta's Danielle Smith, Ontario's Premier Doug Ford, and Scott Moe in Saskatchewan have all written letters or otherwise called for these acts to be amended or repealed as they contribute to the environment where the same violent offenders are repeatedly arrested and released for similar crimes. Exemptions announced by Prime Minister Mark Carney have effectively nullified most of the retaliatory tariffs Canada had imposed on trade with America, despite previously pledging to support maximum impact trade measures. According to Oxford Economics, the carve-outs cancel out nearly all of the retaliatory tariffs that Trudeau and Carney both introduced in response to the Trump administration. Although the move may help alleviate some inflation, economists say Canada may still see a recession before the end of the year. Canada hit the US with several retaliatory tariffs in March, implementing 25% across the board tariffs, with a further round of tariffs levied in April. The first suite of tariffs involved new import taxes of 25% on about $60 billion in US goods, before adding additional levies against American vehicles in early April. Despite his elbows up message while on the federal election campaign trail, Carney has since announced a 6-month tariff exemption for products used in Canadian manufacturing, processing, and food and beverage packaging. Carney said during the federal leadership debate last month, the principle in terms of our counter tariffs is to have maximum impact in the United States, minimum impact here. Automakers such as General Motors Company are now also permitted to import select vehicles into Canada without being tariffed. There was an additional carve-out for items related to healthcare, public safety, and national security. So Carney seems to be making large concessions to Trump rather than fighting the existential threat of his administration, as he said during his election campaign. But maybe this is all part of his secret plan we've heard about on the campaign trail as well. But Cosmin, will these exemptions provide any relief for the Canadian economy, or is this too little too late?
So, yeah, I think too little too late is an accurate assessment. As Oxford Economics revealed, while this does actually reduce some of the inflationary pressure the economy is seeing from these tariffs, with all these exemptions, right? Essentially, these exemptions repeal all of the tariffs placed in retaliation to US President Donald Trump. And it makes me wonder whether this was conceived after Carney's meeting with Trump, despite the fact that on the campaign trail, he essentially promised to conduct tariffs that would have a maximum impact on the US economy. Well, this seems to be the opposite of a maximum impact. And there were plenty of people telling the Liberal government beforehand, before they even first introduced tariffs in March, that retaliatory tariffs was not the way to go. And here we are 2 months later, and the Liberals, I guess, have suddenly seen the light. But just to talk more about some of the things we might see as a result of this, as Oxford Economics mentioned, it will reduce inflationary pressure, but the recession risk remains high. And a recent poll by Reuters shows that economists still expect Canada to have near zero growth by the end of this year and essentially enter a recession. And we don't know, and there's no predictions right now on how long that recession might last, but it could be just around the corner. Additionally, there have been recent data on the labor market, which isn't a good sign, right? Like employment fell actually in manufacturing specifically by 31,000 jobs in April, and the unemployment rate went up to 6.9%. So we're seeing job losses already materializing in the economy, particularly in those sectors that U.S. tariffs targeted. Donald Trump's big plan is to reshore manufacturing to the United States, And just this week, we saw Honda announcing that they want to move its SUV model production to the United States out of a plant in Ontario. So all these signs indicate that while perhaps the retaliatory tariffs are no more effectively, that doesn't mean the damage hasn't already been done. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said he's willing to sit down with Prime Minister Mark Carney to develop federal policy and called on him to release a federal budget. On Wednesday, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne said the governing minority Liberals had no plan to release a federal budget anytime soon, despite it being over a year since the last one was tabled. Champagne said the next fiscal update would come in the form of a fall economic statement. Poilievre said a budget, quote, determines and informs Canadians of the size of the debt, future interest rates, inflation, and the current government's tax policies. This helps companies determine whether to hire or fire employees and whether policies will block major infrastructure projects. He said the lack of a plan sends a, quote, bad signal to investors and ratings agencies and to Canadians wondering if the government has something to hide. Poilievre added that Conservatives will push him to implement a real income tax cut and to axe the federal sales tax on new homes to lower costs and promote house building. He added that cutting taxes would help offset the losses incurred by U.S. tariffs. If accepted, Poilievre vowed to work with the Liberals to help pass proposals in Parliament, quote, before Canada Day. When asked if Poilievre would work with Liberals for other proposed tax cuts, he said he would have to wait and see what was in the bills brought forward in Parliament, but that the Conservative Party supports tax cuts generally. So, Clayton, how long has it been exactly since the last federal budget, and is Carney falling back on prior promises he made during the campaign that he would reintroduce fiscal restraint to the Liberal Treasury and transparency by delaying the budget again?
So the last federal budget was presented on April 16th of last year. So it's been 394 days since Canada's last federal budget. And it's worth noting when the federal budget was announced, that Finance Minister, then Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, who has a role now in Carney's cabinet today, set a $40 billion guardrail for the government, and it shot past that self-imposed limit by over $21 billion. And right before she was set to give the address announcing the Liberal government's failure, she resigned, which started the domino effect that led to the leadership change from Trudeau to Carney. But towards the second part of that question, Poilievre certainly believes Carney is failing to fulfill his promises of fiscal restraint and transparency. And really, how can Canadians hold him accountable if he doesn't even show them his plan? And if you recall, during the campaign, he repeatedly ran on the promise that he indeed had a plan. So much like during the campaign, Canadians are just asked to suspend critical thought and accept that he has a secret plan that will save the country that nearly 10 years of Liberal policies have destroyed.
That's it for today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. You can stay on top of new episodes every weekday by subscribing to the Daily Brief on iTunes and Spotify. Also, while you're at it, make sure to hit us with a 5-star rating and please leave a review.